And now we cross over to our Oseong for global insight and an in-depth look at important developments in world affairs.
Thanks very much, Morgan. It is indeed time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. And America's biggest shopping holiday, Black Friday, took place over the weekend, extending into Cyber Monday deals that are now wrapping up in the US. In the second year of the COVID-19 pandemic and amid global supply chain troubles and issues in logistics, many people around the world were watching just how hard Americans would shop this Black Friday as an indicator of whether consumer confidence is coming back in the world's largest economy. We discussed the trends we saw this year and what it all means for economic recovery. For this, we have Shika Jain, partner at Simon Kucher and Partners, and we also have Professor Yang Jun-seok, who teaches economics at the Catholic University of Korea, joining us today. Very warm welcome to you both. And well, let's start with you, Ms. Jain, in the US. Now, you're wrapping up Cyber Monday deals right now as we speak. And well, what were some noticeable changes in the way people shop this year during Cyber Monday and, of course, Black Friday?
Thank you for having me, first of all. There were a number of differences this year compared to the holiday shopping season last year in the US. Firstly, consumers said that they had plans to shop more during Cyber Monday and Black Friday this year versus 2020. That said, we have still not experienced a full recovery to the shopping levels of 2019, especially as we are not 100% clear of the pandemic. In terms of where consumers said they were going to shop, there were also some changes. Early indicators in the fall suggested that consumers were ready for revenge retail and had full intentions to go back to physical stores now that vaccines are widely available. We did see that come through via higher footfall in store numbers in 2021, which were 40 to 50% higher compared to 2020. And overall, last year, consumers were a lot more conservative in their spending due to high economic and job uncertainty as a result of the pandemic. As we have more or less stabilized now, consumers have become a lot more optimistic and reflected that in their shopping habits this Cyber Monday and Black Friday.
Well, Professor Yang, now to bring you into the conversation. When we look at some preliminary data, it seems that shoppers began snapping up holiday deals much earlier in the month of November, while Black Friday sales actually fell short of last year's. Well, that's according to Adobe Analytics. Do you see this as a permanent shift or a temporary phenomenon?
Well, I think it reflects partially what's going on because last year you couldn't have in-person shopping all that much. We had, the United States had a perhaps unusually large share of purchases taking through online, and that might be readjusting for the moment. Also, the United States consumption right now is skewed toward goods, merchandise, rather than services, and that might that will probably readjust as the situation normalizes, the problems with coronavirus goes down. But the big question here is how will people react to the new Omicron, and whether they'll be scared out of in-person shopping again, in which case we might have more share going back to online shopping and perhaps even less spending as well. One problem has been that supply bottlenecks have reduced supply of certain very popular products. For example, Xbox, PlayStation game players, and for those type of goods, the lack of those type of goods in the supply may have reduced the consumption somewhat, not necessarily because people don't want to consume, but the goods that they want were not available.
Mm-hmm. A lot of external factors at play, definitely. And well, Ms. Jain, you mentioned a slight recovery in consumer shopping this holiday season, but still not enough to get back to pre-pandemic levels. How has this really affected how much consumers are willing to spend?
Yeah, so now that the economic recovery is more in the forefront and life is somewhat normal, with the pandemic continuing to happen, but a little bit more in the background. Of course, we will have to see how the new Omicron variant develops. Consumers are willing to spend a lot more. In addition to that, as the professor mentioned, there are some other macroeconomic factors at play. A big one in the US is inflationary pressures that are driven primarily due to supply chain and shipping challenges. These have caused price increases, to the consumer because retailers are passing on those increased costs to consumers. And as a result, the total spend for the similar basket of goods has gone up. And another factor that's actually encouraging consumers to spend more is the continued rise of buy now, pay later. It's available for almost any item. There are a lot of players in the space that are offering their services to consumer goods and retailers. And this allows consumers to really stretch the money that they have to spend and encourages them to spend more overall without having to take a huge hit on their wallet in one go.
Well, Professor Yang, US consumer sentiment fell to its lowest level in a decade, according to the University of Michigan's predictions. And this, of course, comes amid concerns about rising prices as well. The university survey said that consumer sentiment was around 67.4 in November. Do you think this flop in confidence is going to translate to a more sluggish growth for the fourth quarter of this year?
I think it basically depends on two things that we don't know completely right now. The first is energy prices. If people are not as confident, it's because they see inflation, and where people get their impression of inflation in the United States is gas prices. Gas prices have risen a large amount in the last year. In fact, the two biggest contributor to the U.S. inflation is energy and used cars. And right now, in the past month, the global oil prices have been dropping. And furthermore, the supply chain problem may be easing, but it's not solved yet. If the inflation comes relatively under control, then I think we will see consumer sentiment go back up. And also, if the Omicron does not prove to be a threat, then we'll also see the consumer sentiment going back up. But if the inflation stays at a high level for an extended period of time, then I think that will consumers will continue to have a low consumer sentiment, and that may be a hindrance to further growth. But we'll have to see basically where the oil prices go and how Omicron goes.
Oh, Ms. Jane, for nearly 2 years now, we've been dealing with supply chain disruptions and shortages of some essential items. How are these shortages impacting the holiday shopping season, or even just consumer behavior in general?
Yeah. Given the prevalence of the supply chain challenges in the news, and retailers communicating proactively about potential inventory shortages, consumers are highly aware that the items that they want to give as gifts or in general could be out of stock. And consumer reaction to these disruptions has manifested in one of two ways. One segment of consumers that are dead set on buying what they want likely did not wait until Black Friday to get the best deals. They said, this is the item I want, I'm going to buy it. I care a little bit less about whatever price it may be at. A second segment of consumers, they're the more reactive, price-sensitive group. They're willing to take a chance in order to get the best deals, even if it means that maybe they would have to substitute what they really wanted with the next best alternative. And retailers anticipated these trends. They've developed waves of holiday deals. This is the second year in a pandemic. They're learning and getting better. So they decided to take advantage of these behaviors and have become more transparent and proactive in messaging their Black Friday plans to all consumers so that there's planning on both the retail side as well as the consumer side.
And consumers indeed are they react to price changes, and they're very sensitive to price levels, of course. And well, Professor Yang, inflation's just been off the charts for months and months now, and well, the US Federal Reserve, they've insisted that this is a transitionary trend, but it does seem like quite a long transit. We've spoken about this before, of course, but well, some experts are warning now that Fed needs to raise interest rates right now at this point in order to avoid stagflation. Would you agree with this view?
Well, I think they do need to accelerate their tightening policy, perhaps not necessarily raise the rates at this time, but they will probably need to accelerate tapering, and they may need to bring up the schedule for raising the interest rate if the inflation continues. But as I mentioned, the two biggest factors for U.S. inflation is energy, which the U.S. monetary policy can do very little about, and also used cars. That's because of lack of parts which are available to make new cars for the most part. Again, monetary policy will not have too much effect on that. Where the monetary policy may be important is we don't want these inflationary pressures to raise people's expectation of permanent future inflation, and that's where raising the interest rate may become a useful tool. If the inflationary expectations do not increase, then it may take until maybe about first or second quarter next year, but I think inflation will come down. But if the inflationary expectations of the U.S. public goes up, then we'll probably have a much longer and much higher inflation than warranted.
And while the whole COVID-19 pandemic has been very trying for economists, analysts everywhere, just throwing them off their predictions really. And while some expected that traffic at retail stores were going to actually pick up this Black Friday because people were deprived from in-store experiences. But well, Ms. Jane, it shows that data shows that traffic at retail stores this Black Friday actually dropped around 28.3% compared with 2019 levels, and that's according to Sensormatic Solutions. And we also saw retail giants like Walmart and Target deciding to remain closed on Thanksgiving. Do you think that this is an indicator that Black Friday shopping, the tradition really of queuing up outside these brick and mortar shops, is going to start to wane over the coming years?
Yeah, so definitely something that we saw in 2020. You know, retailers pulled forward the holiday shopping season for safety reasons to allow for social distancing, and that trend has persisted in 2021. One point to call out is that despite not returning to 2019 levels, in-store shopping this year still grew by 40 to 50% compared to 2020. You know, and by starting sales early, which retailers did this year and last year, it's really a win-win for both retailers and consumers. For retailers, it let them build in that buffer to mitigate some of those supply chain and shipping concerns. It allowed them to assess the demand that hot items had so that they could predict inventory levels in advance. And it reduces the stress that Black Friday puts on the retail workers in the store. And for consumers, starting early provided a safe shopping environment in store due to less crowding. And it also allowed for flexibility and comparison shopping for those consumers that chose to shop online from the comfort of their own home. And it also gave consumers peace of mind that, you know, they can get their desired items before Christmas if they just planned in advance. And I think in terms of the future outlook, as consumers continue to change their behavior this year, and depending on how the pandemic progresses into next year, I think the importance of Black Friday as the day for getting the best deals and as the biggest shopping day of the year will continue to wane, and will likely be a permanent shift in the holiday shopping landscape.
And while shopping fever is pretty contagious, and Professor Yang, South Korea also had a designated shopping period in the first 2 weeks of this month. And consumer sentiment here in the country has been on the rise for the past 3 months as vaccinations started speeding up. But do you think that consumer confidence will remain high and translate into consumption over the next few months?
Well, I think Korea was helped a lot by reduced distancing measures at the beginning of November. if you look at the September and October figures, well, September we did fairly well, though less than perhaps expected with the Chuseok and the relief payment. It went up by about 2.2%. And the October retail sales, in a sense, it was somewhat disappointing. The numbers came out this morning, and it only went up by 0.2% compared to September. But it depends, I think, on how safe people feel about spending and how the inflation is going to go. We have to make a difference between total spending and online spending. If we just had a delay in further loosening of the distancing levels, partially because of the rising number of infections and reduced number of intensive care beds available, and I think that may put a damper on in-person spending. That means more shift back to online spending. But as far as the total spending goes, I think we'll see a continued more or less level or perhaps even a rise in the total spending for the rest of the year. But next year, I think depends on how inflation goes, and if the wages don't catch up to inflation, then I think we will see some reduction in consumption. But I think that's for next year rather than this year.
Well, this is where we'll have to wrap up the interview today. That was Shika Jain, partner at Simon Kucher & Partners, and Yang Jun-seok, Professor of Economics at the Catholic University of Korea. Thank you both so much for your time today.
Thank you for having us.